of it is due over spring break. But for sure, the first 7 pages completed will be due on May 13th. So I'm giving it to you now to get started on it, and then after about page 7, I pick and choose what you have to do. So, and these are the basic facts from notes, and then when I do review sessions, it's a great way to review. I go through stuff to remind you of things. It really is beneficial. Everybody who went to the review sessions last year, it was noticeable how much better they did and felt they did on the test. Next, you're not doing a full DBQ. What you're doing is you're doing just some of the as a document practice for the DBQ on the New Deal. So here's your prompt. I want to get it in 2 sheets because it's the same paper. So write your thesis right above it. You're very talented young people, right? Most of you are pretty young, right? What's the definition of young? Younger than me. That's the definition of young, right? Everybody remember that. If you're younger than me, then you're young. That means almost everybody in this school is young. Moving on. So you have documents to read. Okay, did you get this stuff? Grab it. So you have to read these documents, and this is phrases, so it's not sentences, so it does not have to be a pin, but answer those questions below. So put in context for each document. So stuff you're going to know about the New Deal that we do in class, you're going to have to read on your own. You have to know. Next, so that is due on Monday. This is also due on Monday. Page 516 and 518 in the review book, 8 multiple choice questions. You must do those multiple choice questions. There's a stimulus. This is how the AP does it. They give you a stimulus that will get you in the frame of mind of the era that the questions are in. The questions are not directly from, it's either a document or a cartoon or whatever it might be, but it's more like it's going to be related to it and about that era. Now, the big reason we have to do this, we have to start getting used to the style they write AP or write questions for the AP exam. And that's my feeling towards standardized tests. So you just have to get used to it. So when you're done on Teams, for the thing I have for spring break assignment, I have to keep it. So check how you do it. And I'll just give you credit, just a few points for it, but I want you to do it and start practicing it, and I'll reward you for doing it. Lastly, on Tuesday or Wednesday of that week after, we're going to do the test on the New Deal. Some of these things we'll know in class. Some of these things you have to get from chapter 25 of the textbook. I originally was going to give you the full list, but I narrowed it down to what we're going to have on the test. Sound good? This is what you have to know. I'll answer questions on Monday. I'll go through a few more things, and then we'll do the test. The asterisks, probably going to be short IDs or answer questions. And there is a chance for extra credit. Yes? It's going to be a few multiple choice, a few matching, and then short IDs. It'll be close with it. Any questions? Extra credit. So there are 2 great documentaries on the Great Depression we don't have time to watch, and so I'm setting up for you to do extra credit on it. It's on Teams, the links are there, and there are 2 worksheets, 1 worksheet for each one. If you decide you want to do it, you on your way out can pick them up right here. If you decide you don't want to do it, and there are 2. I really like those. I think they're fantastic. I really hope you like them. I think they're great. But you'll get more credit if you do both. All right. I really enjoy it, and I just checked again to make sure the links work, and they worked for 2 people in my study hall. So hopefully they'll work for everybody. You know how that is, but that's a chance for extra credit. Sound good? Any questions? Yes.
So when you say the first 7 pages, you said all of it?
That will. You have to do those. Yeah, front and back. Yeah.
Okay, so it was the first 7 pages, you said?
Yeah. Front and back, page through page 7. But that will be. I'm not going to collect this till May 13th, but I'm giving it to you now. Yeah.
Okay, and then we have 2 sections, or 2 sections each from 1 book. It'll be in chapter 25 from the textbook, and then that one.
Yeah, from the review book. And that's multiple choice questions. And so it's from the New Deal stuff, from the New Deal stuff.
Okay, so we should do like chapter 25 first and then answer those questions?
Yeah, you better go back and review. Yeah. Yeah, you better know the material a little bit. Any other questions? All right, so let's go ahead and get to finish up the causes. Yeah. And then we'll play another song from 1932. Let me just quick one. Let me be clear on this. You're not writing a DBQ for this. Everyone got that? You're just doing the questions on this and writing your thesis on top. Has everyone got that? You're not writing the full DBQ. Did everyone hear me say that? Just filling this out. It's just practice to go through the documents and think about it. It's good practice. And I know I squeezed it in there, but I thought I didn't want 5 pages. We get it in on 1 page. I'm pretty proud of this. I know the font is small, but you are young and or what? Spry. Some of you are, you're close. And you are young by the definition of young in this classroom. Younger than me. I think that's very logical. I could go into almost every classroom and say that. Well, Peterson, I mean, that's. Phillips. Oh, Mr. Phillips looks pretty spry to me. All right, did we get to speculation?
Yes.
All right, here we go. All right, so 1% had 90% of the stock, and the thing about speculation is that's another one accumulating wealth. Oh, what was the even though it wasn't the biggest loss in history, what was the day that kind of represented the stock market crash? Black what? Black Tuesday. I know we have Black Thursday, Black Monday, Black Thursday. And let's see, what else did we do yesterday? Yesterday was a big day. We did the stock market. Oh, what happened? What did the GDP do by 1932? It dropped by how much? A third. And therefore the money supply dropped by a third. What's GDP stand for again? Yeah, we got it. The GDP. What was unemployment by 32? 25. But even then, it's probably significantly higher because they didn't count everybody. I mean, that's just something. It's really hard to figure out unemployment. To this day, they can't really figure out exact unemployment. And so, like in bad times, it's probably a little bit. It's probably low, the figure they get, and in good times, it's probably a little high because they don't figure it out. If they try to come up with a formula, yeah, the Labor Department does the best. Yeah, but it's got to be low in all those kinds of things. And when did the recession begin? 29. I heard 49 too. Wow, we're coming out of recession, the post-war recession in 49. So we got overproduction. What was the big product? They quit producing those and it rippled every part of the economy. Construction would also be a really big one. So we got speculation. We get 1%, 90% of the stock. Oh, what was the wealth trickling down? Yeah. So I cut out a little bit here, but we have written down bubbles. What we have 2 really big bubbles. It encouraged bubbles. And don't forget the thing about bubble economies. There is a euphoria when there's a bubble. And everyone thinks, I figured out the new magical way to make money. It happens every time. The big thing in 29 was a thing called investment trusts. They were these bonds that were created that people were investing in. And it was actually kind of crazy. People were investing in, so let's say you speculate in the stock market and you're worried, what happens if the price goes down? What happens? Remember the margin call? So there was a form of insurance that you could buy in case your price of stock went down called an investment trust. So you put money in that and that would pay your margin. Well, there was no regulation. And so these investment trust companies didn't have any money to pay back the margin. And so people thought they had insurance and speculated even more. But it's better than that. Oh, it's so much better. Let's say I buy this from you. I send a piece of paper and you take my investment trust. He's a company, by the way, fly by night, he has no money. Yeah, you're right. There's no regulations. Guess what he did with this? Anybody know? He sold this. He chopped it up into little pieces and sold them as bonds to other people. And so no one had any idea what these things were worth. And I should add, those other people, what did they do with the bonds he sold? He chopped them up and sold them again. I have a piece of paper saying that insurance. So what could I do with that? Chop it up and sell it. And then chop it up and sell it. I could combine it with other debt, make it another bond and sell it. Now, if all you're saying, how do you do that? I wouldn't even know what things are worth. Do you see the problem? Nobody had any idea what anything was worth. And everybody was speculating. And so that's where you get this crazy thing called derivatives in the 2000s. The same thing was happening. Gambling on the value of stuff that nobody knew if it existed or not. Nobody had any value. And so when it burst, it exposed all the debt. It exposed all the debt. And the house of cards that was created by nobody knowing what assets were worth, nobody knowing what anything was worth. It was chaos. And the thing was, people were using these assets, these bonds, that nobody knew what they were worth, and using them as collateral for debt. And so banks didn't know what they were getting back when they had their collateral. It was a madhouse. 3, the gap between the rich and the poor, the wealth inequality. Now, the thing about wealth inequality, it's not natural. This was policies we talked before. And don't forget, that's the goal of trickle-down economics. Increase money in the hands of the wealthy. And it worked quite well for that. But the problem was, the money was not necessarily trickling down. I can't emphasize once again, the growth of monopolies made sure that wealth focused to the top and did not trickle down. That's what monopolies do. That's why companies want a monopoly. Now, you might argue that's good and more efficient. You might think that's a good thing or bad thing, but it does focus one. And the other thing is finance. So finance, in a generic term, finance is the dealing, buying, selling of stocks and bonds, the debt that's involved with it, that is finance. So it's not, finance is not necessarily the idea of, you're going to the store and buying products or taking a loan out to buy a new car. It's Wall Street investment. It is buying and selling of bonds. It is buying and selling of stock. It is setting up corporations. That is the very generic term of finance. And here's the issue of finance. It exploded with speculation. Finance is speculation. Now, maybe that's good, maybe that's bad. But the vast majority of people who are involved in finance are what kind of people? They have to have wealth. And so you have people buying stock, you have relatively wealthy people buying stock, or very wealthy people buying stock from other wealthy people. The money just circulating on the top. Does everyone catch that? That means what money's going to the bottom. Not very much in finance, because most people can't afford to speculate. So the money's spiraling on top. And there's less risk, at least appeared to be less risk than starting a business on their own. And so this has the effect of killing demand. So this is a pie chart from 1929. And 1% of the people had an income of $10,000 and over. Multiply that by about 20 and you have it today. Approximately, you can't go got a complete comparison. That means the vast majority were making under 2,000, but it's worse than this. Half the population was below the poverty line. Half the population in the United States made $750 a year or less in 1929. And do you want to guess what the median income of a farmer was? $273 a year. Now, once you multiply that by about 20, you get today's numbers. But that is almost nothing. How does this kill demand? People didn't have money to buy things. What kind of economy do we have after the 1920s? It's a consumer. People need to buy stuff. If money's now we're having conversations back here. And that's going to end. Is that what you're asking?
Yeah.
Okay, then ask me. Okay. At least you're talking about the stuff.
Yeah.
Bear market.
Okay.
Yeah. But what it meant is that the majority of people had less and less money to buy goods. If money's going to the top, but the economy needs as many people as possible to buy stuff. If you don't have people buying stuff, the economy crashes. People, and therefore companies don't make money, and therefore either they close down or they lay off workers. I mean, why produce goods if no one's going to buy them? That's a really important element here. So a large gap between the rich and the poor is an economic ticking time bomb. It's an economic ticking time bomb. And it always is. It always is. Because it kills demand. Especially when you have an economy that we developed with the Industrial Revolution. A capitalist economy needs to constantly grow. And if it can't grow, unemployment. This is a big deal. And so that means consumer demand is going to tank. Oh, sure, people will try to get away with it or get around it. If wages aren't going up or stagnant and you still want to buy stuff, how do you buy stuff if your wages are stagnant? Yeah, borrow money, but eventually you can't borrow anymore. Or you look around and you see, these people are losing their jobs. I better not borrow anymore. And thus, demand stagnant. Yeah.
Okay, who can they borrow money from? They can't borrow from banks.
Sure they can.
Okay.
They can, but it's a little bit harder. It's harder. The lower your income is harder to borrow money. But yes, they can borrow.
Banks are still like giving out.
Before the Depression.
Okay.
Then once the Depression hit, the banks won't even know that. The banks are alive. So good question. Next, I like the cartoons, kind of the clever one. Dividing up the pie between the different classes. And I think you get the gist of it, right? That's a different kind of cap now. Remember the paper cap in the 19th century? That cap was a working man's cap in 1920. Just so you know. All right, so next, financial failure. There was a complete financial failure across the world. Now, fortunately, because of the New Deal, that did not happen in 2008. If it would have, oh, geez. But it did. The New Deal laws, those that were still in effect, saved the financial system. So, what's the thing about the financial system? There was basically no regulation of banks, no regulation of speculation at all. Banks were making risky loans, especially after the Florida real estate bubble collapsed. And you might know what a reserve is. A reserve is for a bank. Well, what do they do? Let's say you have a bank. You own a bank. And people put savings in a bank. And back then, that's how banks made most of their money. They had to encourage people to put savings in. So you start a savings account, you give money to the bank, and by the way, then they give you a little piece of paper saying that they owe you this much money. So you're essentially, if you put a savings account in the bank, you're loaning money to the bank. That's what they're doing. You're loaning money to the bank. What do banks do with that money? Yeah, they immediately loan it out. They loan it out. They're hoping that everybody who has a savings account doesn't come at once and pull their savings out. So they need some money just in case. They need some money for when people do come. Not all, but when people come. What do they call that money? Reserve. And normally I consider to be a safe reserve for a bank would be 10% of deposits. 10%. But since there was no real set rule, especially with interstate commerce, some banks had less than 1% reserve. Some banks had negative reserves. How do you get negative reserves? Yeah, they borrowed from other banks and also loaned out all the money they had. Now, one more thing about the fund of reserves, and this would never happen today. Let's say, I'm a bank. Who wants to borrow money from me? 20% down, 20% in interest, compounding, all right? Cool. You sign an IOU. You sign it, boom, I loan you $1 million, you owe me $1 million plus interest. That piece of paper, what is it to me? It's an asset. How much is it worth? $1 million. Plus interest.
20%.
Oh, yeah.
It's over.
I have $1 million, even without interest, I have $1 million, right? Does everyone see how that's an asset? You owe me $1 million. You signed a contract, so you're going to pay, right?
Definitely.
So what? Could that be a reserve? Do you see what I just did there? They were using what other people owe as a reserve. Could they do that today? What do you think happened in 2008? Now, what can I do with this? Couldn't I chop it up in pieces and sell it? Couldn't I take insurance on it? Chop it up in pieces, and you chop that insurance up in pieces, and I chop this up in pieces, and we sell it? I'm not kidding about the chopping up in pieces. It's crazy what they do financially. It's absolutely crazy. So, here's the point. Nobody knew what anything was worth. Nobody knew if they're ever going to get their money back. Nobody knew if banks were stable. All they make, oh, let's get back one more thing of risky loans. So let's say I'm Bank A, and I want to loan $1 million. All right? We talked about this. I don't have $1 million. So where do I get $1 million from? Borrow from Bank B. Where does Bank B get the money from? Bank C. From Bank D. From Bank E, who ironically might have borrowed originally from me. All it takes is one bank to collapse, and what happens? The whole thing falls. Yeah. In fact, you're jumping. Guess what I'm going to be typing here and type down in just a second. The whole thing built on debt, a house of cards. Yeah. Would that happen in 2008? Yes. Can that happen today? Yes.
I would basically like, what's the
Interest. Interest and collateral. So the banks have to put up collateral. By the way, what would the banks put up as collateral? The debt, the assets they get because people owe them money. Yeah. And there's something else, and this is really important to understand. Virtually all banks are corporations. So remember, it's an entity. And so let's say I'm a loan officer working for a bank. Even the person who runs the bank by the CEO, I'm not the owner, they're stockholders. And so if I make a bunch of loans, I still get all my fees for making the loans and pay. And so if the bank still goes under, do I lose my fees? No. So why not make loans? Woohoo! I know, I would glare at that too. You know a bank called Washington Mutual? Wow. That's what Washington Mutual, this big bank did. They bought up people's mortgages. And they just were raking in money, and then the whole thing just collapsed. Yet the people, the highest ranking officers left with millions of dollars, and the company collapsed. What year was that? 2009. I know that well because the mortgage my wife and I have for our home was bought up by Washington Mutual. And then we found out our mortgage was bought up by this place called Sun Trust. Some of you might have heard of that. Yeah. So next, so what we have is interlocking debt. And we could go, I mean, there's so many things, and we talk about today. That's one thing, I don't know if I'm gonna do it this year. In special topics, I've done the 2008 crash, and I might do a little brief one, but I literally last year had my class wanting to fight me. They were so mad at the financial system. It was so crazy. Either fight me or fight everybody or fight me because they didn't understand it and they're mad at me. So, and the thing is, I only kind of understand it. Nobody really understands it. You have interlocking debt. And so here we have the debt ratio to the GDP. And look how much. Household debt and debt for private individuals was equivalent to the size of the entire economy. Because people were borrowing, couldn't borrow anymore. New Deal controls kept the debt low. When the conservative revolution in the 1980s took place, remember that's deregulation. The next time it would reach 100% would be in 2008. Gee, I wonder what happened in 2008. Where are we at right now? We're floating about 60%. Is that bad? Not necessarily. But if the debt to GDP keeps going up, that could be bad. That's what people should watch. But then again, if there's a bubble going, they get into euphoria and everyone forgets. So, what do you have? You have this crisis. Once the things begin to panic or things fall apart, there's a bank panic. Bank panic leads to bank failures. And the banks that survive, they don't loan money to anybody. That's a credit freeze. Here are people lined up at a bank in New York City, demanding their deposits, and did this bank have it? Now, this is what would normally happen. They just locked the doors and ran away. You will see instances where the president of the bank will come out and he'll face the people. That takes guts. And we were in a credit freeze till about 2011. We were like, it's almost impossible to borrow money. I mean, you could do it, but it was just everybody was scared because nobody knew what any asset was worth. Look at all the bank failures. I should add regulations that were put in place for what's called the savings and loan industry, which was kind of a local bank. They did mostly personal loans for mortgages. They got rid of those in kind of the Reagan Revolution of 1980, and they all blew themselves up here. It took them about 2 years to blow themselves up. And then they got rid of some of the New Deal regulations, and that's the crash. You notice there's not as many banks here, partially because of the New Deal and partially because bank monopolies. There's just not as many banks. Yeah.
So many banks crashed before.
Banks or farmers. Think about it. Farmers. Because the farm economy was already crashing, so small rural banks were already collapsing because farmers couldn't pay back their debt. And the thing about it is that, of course, made everything more unstable because everybody's trying to make up for the losses they had. So good question on that. Oh, and this is the drop in loaning from the Depression. Look at the crash in loaning. That's pretty dramatic, isn't it? Nobody wants to buy anything. Nobody wants to loan money. No, and how do you start a business? I mean, businesses can't start unless there's credit, period. I mean, they need credit. Even the most profitable businesses today, they borrow money every single day. And they pay it back at night, called the paper market. They all do it. So you need credit. Huh? Looks like what? Oh yeah, it kind of does, doesn't it? Yeah. It took me a second of what? Oh, now I get what you're saying. All right, so debt deflation. Here's another biggie. Debt deflation is the one that is such a major crisis. Debt deflation. So what happens is this. If people make, let's say, we'll use a private individual, but obviously you're going to multiply this by corporations. Oh, I should add one more thing. Corporations owe money. Who's responsible for the debt? The corporation, the entity. Are the owners responsible for the debt? No, because they're shareholders. The corporation is. And so think about in terms of, I'm going to talk about an individual, but for an entity, it makes it that much more complex. That's why bankruptcies today for businesses are so incredibly complex. So, in a depressed economy, think about what's happening in a depressed economy. We can all imagine that, right? People are going to have less money. And even if your wages didn't go down, even if you're still doing well, you're looking around and saying, wow, all of these people are losing their job. I'm kind of worried about tomorrow. But let's say you didn't do well and you have debts to pay. You are a business or part of a business or corporation. You overextended when times were good and you borrowed money and now you got to pay it back. Or an individual. I mean, think about it. 1928, the economy's booming. We're going to be rich forever. I'm going to buy those 20 goats. Isn't that the sign of wealth? You went out and buy those 20 goats. I'm buying all the goats I can get. And so you borrowed money to buy goats. Who would do that if they could do it, right? Borrow money to buy goats. Who likes goats? Have you ever been around goats? They're interesting. All right. So, let's say you're not bringing in as much money as you can. What do you do? In a depressed economy and things aren't going well and you bought too many goats, There was a problem. You decide to pay back your debt, but no one's spending money anymore. Profits are down, wages are down, there's not as much money. That is what we call a liquidity trap. Has everyone got that? A liquidity trap. And a liquidity trap means that there's no liquid assets. Do you know what liquid assets are? Cash money. It means money that can be easily, it's fungible, you can spend with anything. If you have assets that are, let's say, fine art or baseball cards, it's really hard to cash those in. Who's going to take a baseball card? So, but cash you can spend. But what if there's no money in circulation? Well, you got to come up with money, don't you? If you got to pay back their debts and you have less money, how do you do it? There's two ways to do this. Number one, you cut spending. Does that make sense? If you're in debt and have to pay it back, you don't buy those extra 20 goats, even though you already got 20. Right? Or you don't buy that boat. You don't buy that car. You don't take that trip. Or for a company, you don't expand. Maybe you don't buy that new innovation. Does that make sense to everybody? You cut spending. Now, wait a second. In a depressed economy, if all of a sudden you're cutting spending, what does that do to demand of goods? If people quit spending, what happens to demand? And then what do? Demand starts going down. And then you sell off assets. So you sell off your goods. But what is everybody else doing with their goods? Oh, they're selling their goods too. What happens to the price of goods? They go down. Or whatever your asset might be. Your stocks, your bonds, your real estate, your home, your art. Everybody starts selling everything. And what happens to the price of assets, of all assets? Spiral down. And here is the trap of debt deflation. What if everybody tries to pay back their debt at the same time? Now, if you have too much debt, it seems like a very responsible thing to pay back your debt. It is. If you borrow too much money, you better cut back and pay it back, especially the way our financial system works in the United States today. But what happens if, twofold, this is the money supply, and here's the money in circulation during the Depression. You see a tank? So there's less money out there. And here's the price. Asset prices tanked. What happens if everybody pay back their debt at the same time? What happens to the economy? It's crash. What happens is very basic. Asset prices tumble. And it depresses the economy even more. And so if it depresses the economy even more, and there's less money in circulation, and you still want to pay back your debts, what do? Well, you cut more spending, don't you? And you sell more assets, don't you? And what happens? The cycle begins again. Cycle starts again. How do you get out of this? This is actually, how do you get out of this? I mean, this is a crisis. All right, this is what we need then. What do we need? Somebody's got to start buying stuff. Here's the big thing. Put a little right here and write down in big letters. Demand. There's no demand. No one's buying anything. No one's buying anything, so everyone has to sell their stuff or pay back their debt because their debt is coming due. That means they cut more spending, which means less people buy stuff, which means asset prices drop again, which means they have to cut spending, and so on. There's no demand. And let's be clear. Would you buy anything at this time? And it gets worse than this. Let's say you want to buy a car. You don't need a car, but you still have a job and you want to buy a car. What are happening to prices when this is going on? Prices are dropping. You want to buy a car. Are you going to buy that car today? You're going to wait. Why? Because the price is dropping. And then tomorrow, prices dropped a lot, but what are prices going to do tomorrow? And then the next day, what are you going to do? So what does deflation do to demand? Just by having deflation, it kills demand. So once again, demand drops. By the way, what does inflation do? If you think prices are going up tomorrow, what do you do today? Yeah, mean, a healthy economy needs a little bit of inflation. You have to do something to get price. Get people one thinking they're going, prices will go up, or give them some way to get demand. Yeah. So we're in this trap, and then government has. See, government's not the same as people. They make the money. They pass the laws. They have an army. They're not the same as you or me or a corporation. Debt does not affect them the same way. Of course, debt affects them, but in a totally different way than it affects people. They're not the same. So what can government do? Well, government, of course, people make mistakes, but wow, do they make a bunch of doozies. First one, there was no effort at regulation. Nothing in the stock market, nothing in the banks, and that would help fuel this over-speculation and overproduction. And there's no safety net. By having no safety net, this killed demand. I mean, the thing about unemployment insurance is this. If you're laid off from your job, which millions of people are going to be laid off in the Depression, just as they were in 2008 or just as they were in 2020, going to be people laid off. They go from having a paycheck to having nothing. Now, they might have savings, but how fast do you suppose people will go through their savings? Right? This is the way life is for most people. Unemployment insurance provides about 1/4 to 30% of your previous paycheck until you find a new job. It's not that much, but it doesn't crash demand. So people don't go from spending a certain amount to nothing. They're still spending a little bit. They call them automatic stabilizers. Same thing too with unemployment, or I'm sorry, with Social Security. If we have a crash and you're near retirement, if you have a pension, I guess I can retire now, which opens up more job opportunities for younger people. So retirement pensions raise wages that way. Next, the Federal Reserve did the opposite of what they're supposed to do. To stop the speculation, they should have raised interest rates. That makes it more hard to borrow money. What did they do instead? They really didn't raise interest rates in 28 or 29. They did a little bit, but they should have dramatically raised interest rates in 28 when the speculative boom was going nuts. And then, all of a sudden, when people quit spending money and banks aren't loaning money, that's when you cut interest rates. They actually hardly cut them at all, thinking that a cut in interest rates would hurt the already weakened bank industry, but it actually made it much worse. So, for example, in the 2008 financial crash, the Federal Reserve lowered the interest rates that banks charge each other. It's called the federal fund rate. It's basically the key interest rate. They cut it to 0%. So that meant every other interest rate, like mortgage or car, credit card, dropped. Japan actually, during the crash, went negative interest rates. Yeah. Actually, for U.S. Treasury bonds, they went negative too, negative interest rates. But what did the Federal Reserve do in 2022 when they thought prices were going up too fast? They raised it to stop the speculative boom. That's why we have high interest rates, right? Relatively high. For that reason. So they did not do what they're supposed to do. This is called monetary policy. What was the traditional way in the 19th century? If you want to protect your industry and keep out foreign competition, and therefore hopefully people buy more of your goods, and that would stimulate growth, what was the tax they would put on imports? They decided to dramatically raise the tariffs in 1930, called Congress passed this law, the Hawley-Smoot tariff. You've got to yell, Smoot! You can't just say Smoot. Yes, Smoot was a senator from Utah. No, you're waiting for a senator from Utah for that. They dramatically increased the tariffs. Now, the thought was this will protect American industries, but tariffs do what to all prices? So everyone got that? Prices went up dramatically. Prices went up. Now, wait a second. Prices are going up, and do people have money? No, it was a disaster. And then they're raising the tariffs on goods from Britain, Japan, France, Germany. So what did they do in response? They raised their tariffs. And it started an international trade war. My mouse disappeared. Someone hit my podium. It triggered a trade war. All of a sudden, all these countries raised their tariffs and international trade plummeted. And so people who had surplus goods and wanted to trade them couldn't trade them. The tariff was a disaster, an absolute disaster. Next, austerity. And this was another government policy. And austerity is, write down, cutting government spending. And the idea was this. When there's bad economic times, what happens to tax revenues? Tax revenues went down, and therefore the deficits went up. Deficit is the yearly difference between revenues and expenditure. We just talked about that about Germany yesterday. Revenues and expenditures. Well, the deficits are going to go up in bad economic times. By the way, what do deficits, or what happens to revenues in good times? Go up dramatically. Unless you cut taxes or something, but keep everything staying the same. What are revenues doing today for the federal government? They're going up like mad. Revenues are going up dramatically. Now, it doesn't mean they might spend it all. It doesn't matter. I'm just talking about tax revenues. So there was a real cry. Wait a second. Our deficit's going up. The accumulated deficits we call the debt. And people are saying, wait a second. How can the government continue to spend money when everybody else is broke? Here's a cartoon portraying this. Save, save is the American public. While Congress is spending money and running up a deficit. And so there was a cry to cut spending. And so government spending was cut in 1932. The term was they're going to balance the budget. Now, wait a second. Balance the budget? When no one's buying anything? And one more thing. President Hoover was economically and morally opposed to direct aid. So giving some kind of direct payments or direct jobs or benefits to people who were unemployed or retired. And so he opposed any effort, including an effort to give that bonus to veterans early. He was completely opposed. Why? Because he thought if you give money to the average person, what will they do? Yeah, they'll waste it. They'll quit working, they'll drink it away, they'll never look for a job because they don't know how to handle money. So what philosophy was it? A very social Darwinism. Most people, you got to coerce to work because they're lazy. So what happened? No one's buying anything. And the government cut spending. It killed demand. So that means the government's buying less stuff. And so demand drops more. You think private individuals are going to step into this? Not really, because no company's going to start production if no one's buying anything. Austerity. The worst year of the Depression, the worst time will be the winter of 32-33 after austerity. The worst year of the Depression. Let me throw an example out of a country that did severe austerity at the end of 31. 32 was a nightmare. It's a little place called, I'm trying to remember the name, Germany. And who took power because of austerity and people got so mad? Hitler. No, we don't want Hitler. No, we don't want. That would have been another one if somebody walked by and I'm going, Hitler. So it killed consumer demand and lengthened the Depression. In your lifetime, President Obama and conservative Democrats and most Republicans got really concerned about the deficit, and so they started austerity in 2010. And without a doubt, that lengthened that depression about 2 to 3 years. That's in your lifetime. You were the heady age of 4, right? 2010, were you 4 or 3? 3 or 4? So were you paying attention to the federal budget then?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
Oh, and here is mocking President Hoover's here's someone drowning because of the depression, and instead of helping him, he's throwing him a book that says how to swim. Yeah. In 32, there wasn't just food riots, there was starvation. All right, tomorrow we finish up this last little bit and play, and we have to get FDR elected. Are there any questions on the spring break joy? And if you're staying here, it's going to be snowing all week, so yep. Actually, it's supposed to get warmer. Yeah, Monday after. I think it's supposed to be in the 50s for a high, like Thursday and Friday here. I blame track and tennis and softball. Why? Anytime there's fall or spring activities, it starts snowing. As soon as you start getting closer to the meets, yeah. So naturally, you like the sport, right? Goodbye, everybody, and if I won't see you tomorrow, have a good break. Try your best. Watch the videotape if you start missing me. Watch the tapes on YouTube. And getting up here all that. And tomorrow my plan is to watch the video. Yeah. Everything's on Teams, yeah. Everything's on Teams, we also have the comments, yeah. Yeah. See ya.
Sometimes I wish we could have a pocket FDR. Sometimes I wish we could have a pocket FDR. Just pull them out whenever you get them. Anytime there's an economic crisis, throw FDR at it, it'll be done, and then put it back in your pocket.
And it's not that FDR didn't make mistakes, but it was the whole thing of willing to try something.
God.
Oh, I get for you people. Everybody grab one each. One each of those. One each of these things right here. Okay?
Yeah.
Oh, maybe, okay, well, it should be this one. I have no idea why it is. Maybe I accidentally hit the one, but I'll type it 0. So I can't specifically remember putting it in your grade. I'm trying to show which fire you have to scroll back. That is the video we watched. Really good video. Oh, fire. That's when you missed all those days.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, because the video I have is for this.
Yeah. Scroll back, look out. I must accidentally hit the one with the 0. Wait, if you get to move on, it's really good. Everybody grab one of each. Don't worry. One of them, it's not due until the end of the period. The big one. It's due May 13th. If not, get it to me on Monday. I'll say we have a little more time to work out. I have gifts for everybody. I know. I give too much. I'm too kind.
You give too less, honestly.
Gordon, you were Gavin's logo. Yes.
What even is the new deal? It never was.
Yeah, was Gavin? Oh, he was not.
You did the usual.
We were being so
Watch out what you're still.
Yeah, that's
There's no law.
every time.
I gotta work on my stuff.
Snacks and things and everything.
No. Oh my.
Oh my God. I have a meeting. So I have nothing for you to do today. I was going to grade some stuff, but we had big issues with the vigilante for an 8 demo. And tried to go a bunch of stuff, so I didn't get that. How is everybody?
Okay, yeah, so that's like.
I know you want all of these. All right, so let me explain this, everybody, very quickly. Is that the bell? All right, let's go. Here we go. Two things really quick. This, this, and this. All right, so we have three things to get. Oh, dropped it. First thing, and this is the review packet for the AP exam, and it is not due till May 13th. Because what are you guys doing? Most of you are doing on May 10th. That's the exam. Now, you're not going to do this whole thing. These are notes to review, and jot down a few things, but this is for your review. I do give you credit for reviewing, but the big thing is for you. But the first 7 pages, yeah, you're going to have to do, for sure, all of them. And then after that, I pick and choose what you need. So you will not be doing the whole thing. And this will be doing review sessions, but I'm giving it to you now. A lot of time to start going through it. None of this is due at the end of spring break. But in case you have some free time, just get a little bit done here and there. If you peck away at it, you get a lot of it done, and it really does help review. And then I would do review sessions. And there's something about review sessions. Those who did the review sessions last year for the AP exam did significantly better and felt better about doing it. And I understand there's going to be conflicts, but it really did make a difference. And now, not for everyone, of course, but yeah, it really helped. Next, you're not doing a full DBQ, but you're doing the documents for or you're doing this, reading it. I want to get it on 2 sheets, so I made the print small, but you are young, and I would argue, and or surprise. I make an argument. I can't prove it. So, up here, so that I want to pack it in on 1 sheet, jot down the basic element of your thesis, what you're going to prove, your X, your Y, the A, B, and C, and then for each document, answer these questions in a phrase. Since it's a phrase, it can be in pen or pencil, your choice. Only sentences. But answer these things. Give historical context or relate to something that's going on. Does it prove your thesis? And then the half, what you would compare it to for each document. So you're going to have to do this after you kind of go through the New Deal and all that. Sound good? So you're not writing a DBQ, thesis, and just doing these. All right? That's due on Monday when you get back. Yeah, that's spring break. This May 13th, right? I'm just giving it to you now so we can get it to use. Yeah. Yeah, and I'll finish that in just 1 second. Next, 516 and 518 in the review book, there are 8 multiple choice questions. Do the multiple choice questions, and do those after you've gone through kind of the reading and stuff for the New Deal. And then the key is on teams. So after you get done, go back and grade yourself. I'll give you a few points for doing it, and I post this on Teams. I know you want to capture this moment forever for your scrapbook, but it's also on Teams. And am I in it?
Oh yeah, you smell.
Why did you steal my shadow? Lastly, so I did assign, there's 2 readings that I assigned, but I didn't make a big deal about this week. 1088 to 1011 and 01 for on the Great Depression, and chapter 25. That's the New Deal. I originally was going to give you the full bookmark, but I decided to give you a smaller one. So you see this right here? These are what you need to know from the reading. You have to know this. And so when you get back on Monday, I'll answer questions on it, go over it. I plan to then grab a test, and this will be on the test for Tuesday. Sound good? And that's, so stuff on the class, probably Tuesday. I might do it on Wednesday. But Tuesday. Yeah.
Is it gonna be like a normal test of short ideas?
Yeah, there'll be, I think I might do short answer questions, but it'll be like short IDs, a few matching, a few multiple choice. But that's the only thing. One of the asterisks would be the topics for some kind of essay. Are you happy? I actually cut it back a little bit when my original plan was. Yeah. So, the extra credit. There is extra credit on Teams. There are 2 documentaries I won't have time to show on the Great Depression, ones I really like. So I decided to give it to you. And the same thing I like about those other last two documentaries you watch. Good personal interviews, very well done. And if you get those done, you can choose, except 3rd or 4th. No, here's the deal on this. If you want to do the extra credit, pick up, these are the 2 worksheets for it. Fill out the 2 worksheets. You can do one or both. And I will give you a little bit more credit if you do both. Okay. Just for this one. Any questions? Yeah.
You said that can be 4th.
Yeah, I can put it on 4th grade. I will decide. I will leave it aside, but you have to let me know I'll put it on 3rd. Or actually, I'll see how much time I have to grade it. Unless you make it very clear, then I just got to put them in when I get them in. All right, so there's got to be a little spring break, but remember, I will make it up to you. After the exam, after you take your final, 2 weeks after the exam, nothing but fitness, trench digging, wall sits. What's that? Well, we'll do. You got to dig the trenches first to protect the moat diggers. Yes. And what? Okay, yeah. America. Actually, chapter 20. Go. You can also use the review book for some of the Great Depression. I believe that's chapter 24. Chapter 25 of America. Yeah. All right, let's go dig your notes out. So, the test over this won't be until probably Tuesday or Wednesday. That's my plan. And all of this is on Teams. There are copies of everything on Teams. There's copies of everything on Teams. And the videos are on Teams. I checked during my study hall, and they do work. Yeah, I really like them. I think those are great videos. Yeah, the Great Depression. And so, let's get out of this really quick. And scroll back. We finished.
We just on speculation.
So we got overproduction?
Yeah, we got all of assumption.
All right, really fast. What was, okay, I gave you 3 black days. What was the last one that everyone kind of signifies the crash? Yeah, that's Black Tuesday. And, do you have a question? You sure? I couldn't help you out your hand up or not. It went up and then went down. All right, next. You were here yesterday, right? What's the GDP again? What's the stand for? And how much did it go down in the first years of the Depression? By 1932, how much?
1/3.
By a third. What was unemployment by 1932? And 25%, the thing about that one was, it was probably higher. Whenever there's a depression, the unemployment rate is probably higher than what is, and actually good times, the unemployment rate is probably a little bit, the actual unemployment rate is actually a little bit lower than the number. Just because there are fewer people looking for jobs. Even though they have a formula to figure it out, but it's not ever 100% correct. And what happened to the money supply the first 3 years?
Dropped by a third.
Yeah, people just weren't spending money, even if they had it. So what was the product I said overproduction, but what was the one that symbolized the depression? Because once everybody quit buying that product, it spread to every part of the economy. Cars, because it went to everywhere then. Oh, hey, what does motel stand for? Yeah, motor hotel. Yeah. Yay. I remember I must have been, I think my dad told me that when I was like 6 or something. And I remember just like somebody just told me the secret code of life. I figured out what motel meant compared to hotel. I thought that was so cool. And it's funny how I still vividly remember that feeling of learning what motel meant when I was like 6. Do you have the same feeling with motel? Yeah, everyone kind of feels that way about the definition of motel. So let's get to over speculation. Speculation. So the tax cuts were not going to production, at least as much as they thought. The plan was tax cuts would do what to working people? Did we have this yesterday? What did we finish in yesterday? We just got tax cuts.
Just speculation.
No.
You said that you wanted to write it down.
Yeah, tax cuts not going to production. I made a quick change on that. The top 1% actually had 90% of the stock. 90% of the stock. They were investing in the stock market. And the buying and selling of stocks and bonds and the borrowing of money for that, it's called finance. That's finance. And yeah.
Weren't some people saying if you keep buying stock, things will get better again?
Yeah, that's what that was. You keep buying it, it's going to have to go up. Remember, there's a euphoria that happens during a bubble. And that's going to create 2 big bubbles. The real estate bubble and the stock market bubble. I mean, every financial crash has a bubble. And so this is the stock market bubble. The prices are much higher than everyone thought, and they realize they're spending too much. Like, for example, when everyone realized they were buying swamp in Florida, it's like someone popped the bubble and prices just tanked. And the big thing about a bubble, when the prices go, it's not a slow, gradual drop. It's a crash. And that's the thing. If everybody's buying on margin or borrowing money, they can't pay it back. And it exposed all the debt. Bubbles crashing exposed all of the debt and all of the risky loans that banks were making at once. There's going to be issues. And people make bad investments. Banks make bad investments with their credit too. But if they all happen at once, it exposes all of the problems. And it overwhelms the financial system. And so here I like this nationwide fever over stock speculation. They knew it was going on. But nobody was either willing or understood what to do. And that leads to another big thing, the gap between the rich and the poor. Wealth inequality. What's the name of the economic system of the 1920s? And that was the goal of trickle down. Today we would say supply side. And that was the goal, put money in people's hands. And that's where you get, this is an income pie. And it's actually not a very good chart. But it has 65% of the population made less than $2,000 a year. Now, multiply that by about 20, and it's in today's dollars. And you can't do an apples and oranges comparison just because we have different expectations of money now. But still, that's pretty low. But add one thing about the goal of trickle-down economics. The poverty rate was $750 a year, and half the population was below the poverty rate. $750 a year, and half the population. You want to guess what the median, the middle income for farmers was? So the poverty wage, $750. The median income for farmers, $273 a year. So we have a lot of people just barely getting by. But where's the wealth going? The idea was to trickle down, but it's not trickling down. And so you have, and then don't forget, all these monopolies are focusing money and finance. Finance are buying and selling in stock. And for the most part, especially with 90% of the 90% of the stock owned by 1% of the population, if I'm rich and buying a stock, the odds are you rich or poor? If you have stock. You probably rich. So we're just passing money back and forth if you're rich. Is money trickling down? It can a little bit. You could take your profit and build a factory and hire workers, or you could buy more stock from somebody else. And that's what was happening. Finance, the money spirals around on top. I mean, is it like that today? Absolutely. Absolutely. Most people do not have stock today. It's about 70% don't own stock today. I own a little bit. I have my wife and I have retirement accounts, and we have our retirement now. And I should add one more thing about stocks. I said most people don't own stock. So I'm a teacher. I'm on a retirement system as a public employee. When I retire, I will get